In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back.
I'm Ruth Zaccaria, sitting in this week for regular host Alyson Perry. Welcome to our first program of 2016. In the new year, we plan to stick to the proven formula that's been honed over the course of the 47 broadcasts we've produced in 2015. That said, we will always be looking for ways to tweak our format for the better. For now, you can expect the new year to kick off with an in-depth interview by State Representative Patricia Morgan. This week, Pat previews the upcoming problem of Syrian refugees here in Rhode Island. She's joined by her colleague, Representative Mike Chippendale. Today's show will conclude with a new feature on our federal budget. In between segments, Mark and I will reappear to poke some fun at the ironies that abound in the state government. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be asking the question, are you kidding me? To get the show started, though, we'll begin with analysis of some of the top news stories affecting Rhode Islanders today. Mark.
Thanks, Ruth. We'd like to be looking ahead to new initiatives for a new year. Instead, the top story in Little Rhodey today is like the creature in a bad horror movie. Every time you think it's really dead, it seems to spring back to life, menacing us and our future once again. This time, the monster that won't die is Governor Raimondo's plan to dot the countryside with automated toll gantries. It's all part of her benighted effort to collect new revenue, ostensibly for road and bridge repair. In a year-end newsmakers interview with Channel 12's Tim White, the governor doubled down on her intentions to get an open-ended approval of the plan through the legislature. Moreover, she still refuses to release any details regarding the locations of the planned optical toll gantries, nor of how much each one will charge. The outline of the governor's plan remains the same. She means to float a revenue bond to the tune of $1.3 billion. That would increase Rhode Island's overall debt by 40%, but it would yield $500 million cash, which the governor says she wants to send to the Rhode Island Department of Transportation to fund infrastructure repairs. The problem is, RIDOT is on record that they plan to use more than $400 million of those dollars to build a bus lane on the 610 connector that's been on the drawing board for decades. Oh, and those much maligned toll gantries will cost $43 million to purchase and install. So there won't be a whole lot of bridge repair going on in return for our 30-year obligation to the big bond. Folks, our state government is completely tone-deaf in this matter. The administration has no idea what the hard-working, tax-paying men and women of the Ocean State think of this very fuzzy plan. Moreover, the administration refuses to even consider the much more detailed Republican no-toll bridgeworks plan that's been offered up by a coalition of members of both legislative chambers. Why not, you ask? Well, the Republican plan uses current revenue, which means making 1 or 2% cuts to some existing programs. Worse yet, with no big bond to float, there will be no $800 million of new overhead expenses to distribute to favored attorneys and bond agencies. The Senate President has already rolled over for this plan to pick our pockets for an additional 60 or 70 million tax dollars per year for 3 decades to pay all that vigorish. So our only hope of finally driving a stake into the heart of this beast is the Speaker of the House. Well, he might come through for us. Stranger things have happened, but so far they've only happened in bad horror movies. Ruth?
Thanks, Mark. In the spirit of the holiday season, our state government delivered what it hoped would be a last-minute Christmas present to us all. Just before Santa's arrival at the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training, they delivered its last update for the old year on the state's unemployment rate. The reported rate for November was 5.2%, down from 5.3% in October. This news was delivered by the administration in clear hopes it would make visions of sugar plums dance in our heads. More jaded observers, such as me, wisely waited for the analysis of the numbers by the nonpartisan Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. In a late December press release, the center noted that, like October's DLT numbers, November's drop was based on two very troubling economic signs. The percentage unemployed went down 1/10 of a point, only because actual employment dropped by 770 jobs. But a larger number of Rhode Islanders just flat gave up seeking employment, 1,461. So as the Center for Freedom and Prosperity pointed out, while the reported percentage is arithmetically correct, the hype over its decrease masks the fact that our local economy is still contracting and cannot support the employment levels needed for anything like prosperity. In fact, if we used pre-recession employment levels to compute November's unemployment rate, the number would be 8.3%. Ouch. Rhode Island has lagged far behind neighboring Connecticut and Massachusetts when it comes to rebuilding employment levels following the 2008 crash. Why is that? Energy costs and raw materials have been roughly equal across southern New England. We have virtually the same weather and similar access to markets, both foreign and domestic. So why should the smaller, more compact, and easier to manage state be watching its neighbors pulling away? Well, okay. That's simple. Because no one is managing it. Political concerns that drive legislation are all about raising more money so that favored interests can get benefits they may or may not have earned. No thought is given to streamlining the economic environment in which ocean state businesses have to create all that new revenue. Legislative leadership is more interested in placating the public service unions and the insider professional class than it is in helping out average citizens by removing burdensome regulations and arcane regulatory practices. Folks, unless someone starts steering the ship of state, I'll just be back here next year's day, asking the same question I asked today. What the fructose, lactose, and glucose are they doing up there on Smith Hill? Mark, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, Ruth, what I can tell you is that the inattention to the needs of the people is widespread in the Ocean State today. Let me offer as a case in point the example of our boy treasurer, Seth Magaziner. A year ago, he swept into office courtesy of the Democratic Party machine. During his campaign, he claimed he could deliver 24 consecutive years of compound 7.5% growth for the $8.06 billion state pension fund he inherited from his predecessor, Ms. Raimondo. He may have said that because he had to make that impossibly over-the-top estimate just to project the fund growing to a level where its liabilities could be covered. In the real world, though, Mr. Magaziner's oversight of those assets for the calendar year just ended had the result of a $700 million loss. That leaves us with a net balance of $7.63 billion, down more than $1 billion in just the last 18 months. It's easy to say that the culprit here is then-Treasurer Raimondo's predilection for high-cost, low-yield hedge funds as the main investment vehicle for the state pension assets. What is not easy to say is why now-Treasurer Magaziner stayed with the strategy when those fund results slid below junk bond valuation. Folks, the point is we cannot keep hiring dilettantes because they have the preferred party affiliation. In the case of our last two general treasurers, it sure looks like that practice cost our state retirees a large part of their future security. What a miserable trade. Over the last few broadcasts, Common Sense has covered similar shortcomings in the City of Providence Pension Fund. So it seems that candidates have stopped taking the jobs they run for seriously. But it gets worse than that. Citizenship isn't easy or fun. As a statewide pool of voters, we seem to have gotten too lazy to evaluate candidate qualifications and too fatigued to plot out what will happen to us as individuals if the job of government doesn't start getting done a whole lot better by our elected leaders. It's time for all of us to get our minds in the game and play hard in the run-up to the election next fall. We each have a lot riding on it. Ruth?
Truer words were never spoken. Well, that wraps up news analysis for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Before we hear from Rep. Patricia Morgan, let's take a short break for a lighter take on the Ocean State. I'm psyched. I get to finally ask the question that's been on my mind about so much of what goes on in our neighborhood. Are you kidding me? As the old year closed out and the new year began, there was lots of talk about the upside of global warming. A prolonged bout of above-average temperatures in the Northeast has been the topic of comment, but not complaint. Are you kidding me? This is great! Low heating bills, no productivity losses to weather, and a much wider array of fashion choices have made Q4 2015 a real dream. Some folks are never satisfied, though. Naysayers are already claiming that this balmy interlude is only the first step towards sea level increases that will make the Ocean State part of the ocean. On that very angle, the Daily Caller recently reported on a position taken by Dr. Richard Keene, meteorologist emeritus at the University of Colorado. Keene is a longtime operator of exactly the kind of weather stations that government agencies use to document global temperature conditions. He thinks they do so at great peril of inaccuracy. Dr. Keene notes that there are lots of weather stations recording temperature in populated areas where the urban heat island effect can be enormous. He also emphasizes that there are vast swaths of both ocean and wilderness where no temperature records exist at all. So scientists have to extrapolate. I think that's a synonym for guesstimate. In its reporting on Dr. Keene's comments, the Daily Caller notes that the geological record contains lots of evidence of wild swings in both directions for global temperature over the ages. But consistent human readings of even the population centers only date back 100 years or so. In other words, don't get hot under the collar about global warming just because we caught a break this fall. May I remind you that through this point on the calendar last year, we had cooler temperatures, but virtually no serious storm activity. Then, right around the first week of January, we got buried by snowstorm after snowstorm all the way until April. I hope that doesn't happen again, but it could. So when someone comes to me and says they're going to leave their down parkas and muckalucks in long-term storage this year, the old Yankee in me makes me say it to them. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us Representative Mike Chippendale, one of my colleagues. Welcome.
Good morning, Patricia. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of political stuff going on this year, especially with Donald Trump.
Sure.
He's kind of gotten a lot of people involved, looking at politics and understanding how different policies that we have really do affect our lives. And recently, he made some comments that got a lot of backlash, and it was about Syrian refugees.
Sure, yeah.
I believe President Obama wants to bring 10,000 Syrian refugees over here. And Donald Trump basically said, no, we shouldn't be allowing any Muslims to come here until we figure out how to screen them properly.
Yes.
I believe that's what he was saying.
That's pretty close to what he said, yeah.
I know our Republican caucus had some statements about that, but how about you telling the folks?
Sure. While Mr. Trump certainly has a way about him to bring issues to the forefront that we all may not agree with the delivery of, but, he does bring some salient and poignant issues to the forefront, and this is certainly one of them. It's really not about taking a particular group of people because they are a group and treating them any differently. He's simply saying we've got a very unique situation. And let me go back further and say it's not just Donald Trump saying this. A lot of people feel this way. And I think that's why his message resonates so much.
Yeah.
Let's just take a step back, because this is such a unique situation, and really take the time to do this right. Currently, right now, our systems, at the admission of our own FBI director and national security advisors, isn't going to work to properly vet out 10,000 refugees, which is what the Constitution allows a president in any year to allow into the United States of America, any one fiscal year, to allow into the United States of America. So if they were to allow 10,000 Syrian refugees, how are we going to ensure that implanted among that group, there are not people who seek to do us harm?
Yeah, and it's not just Muslims. It's that that some embedded in that demographic will do harm. I mean, they're saying they'll do harm to us, right? They're issuing statements all the time saying we're coming to get you.
Yeah, I suspect that the majority of these refugees are good people who are being persecuted by terrible people that we can't even comprehend as Americans, because the actions taken against them are so horrific. And whether they're Christians or whether they're agnostic or whether they are Muslims, they're being treated horrendously, and they're being killed, they're being slaughtered, they're being just absolutely treated like
animals. Their country is in war, so they're being bombed from above and
from their own government,
sure,
and from other governments.
I think there were poison gases and stuff,
absolutely,
so you can understand. I mean,
sure.
If I was living there, I would be afraid to stay in my village.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. But as you pointed out, and as the analogy has been used before, where if you take a giant bowl of M&Ms and you put it on the table, and you know that 2 of those M&Ms are made of cyanide, would you let your child eat out of that bowl of M&Ms? And I mean, that's a very simple little analogy or a metaphor for what we're dealing with, but we had 2 of those M&Ms in San Bernardino, California. They weren't Syrian, but they were certainly radicalized. And so the opportunity for someone who is radicalized getting into that mix of refugees has already borne itself out. We've seen it in Austria, where one of the radicalized individuals who perpetrated the Paris attacks was apprehended recently. We've seen it in other countries such as Turkey and Jordan, where people who have been using real but stolen Syrian passports.
Yeah, they
to get
stole the
into
equipment.
During this civil war, they actually went and commandeered all of the real government equipment and materials to make legitimate passports. So they're not frauds, they're not fakes. There's no way for a real customs
they're
agent.
Authentic
Absolutely,
passports
they are authentic with fake information on them. So these folks are using them to get into other countries, claims refugee status from that country as a Syrian, and then they get into the system as a refugee. And so we have every reason.
And they look just like anybody else. You can't see inside somebody's mind.
No, not at all, or their heart. And that's unfortunately that's what we're dealing with. It's an unseen enemy. You can't look at. It's not like a rattlesnake. You can't look at it and say, okay, that's a snake that's going to kill me. It's just something that you can't predict. So going back to the comments of this presidential candidate, really he's just saying, hey, we're in unprecedented times. Let's take some really unprecedented measures to make sure that we get this right before we do what Americans do and should do, which is execute our compassion and help people who are in need. That's what Americans do. And we need to first make sure that Americans are safe before we expose.
I think, isn't that the #1 goal of our elected officials, to make sure that the American people are taken care of first?
It absolutely should be, yeah.
And our safety and...
Yes, and it's a very passionate issue for a lot of people. There's a lot of parallels that have been drawn throughout history, but there are no analogous situations in history to this. This is not something that you can compare to another situation.
I can't remember in any other historical time where there was a group of people that wanted to come and do harm, right? That were fleeing to any other country as refugees and came to do harm with that in their mind, that they wanted to inflict damage to their host.
Exactly. And that's something that it's...
I mean, we had the Cuban refugees at one point. I don't recall there being any kind of a movement there that they were they were going to come to the United States to hurt Americans.
They were just escaping persecution and poverty. Absolutely, yeah. No, the end goal of some of these people that are in the mix is to come here and kill as many Americans or infidels as they possibly can. And that's all they want to do before they die. And to them, doing that is a badge of honor. So how do you fight that? I mean, how do you combat that? There's no way. We don't understand that as Americans. We love freedom. We love our lives. We love our children. You know, the day that they start loving their children as much as they hate us, maybe they'll stop doing the things they're doing. But that, unfortunately, has been going on since the 7th century. And I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Now, the Syrian refugees, and you had meant, is it just Muslims coming, or are there groups of Christians in those Syrian refugees? It's a broad cross-section.
There are Christians, there are
because they have really been persecuted by ISIS over there,
absolutely.
Right?
I mean, if you're a Christian in the midst
they're
of
diminishing.
ISIS
There are
members,
almost
you're dead.
no Christians in the Middle East now.
Absolutely not. So these folks are either forced to deny their religion, which Christians won't do, or unfortunately they meet a really horrific end.
So we know that there is a group of Muslims, ISIS people, Daesh Muslims, people, who are radicalized. They don't look different from anybody else. How does the FBI figure out who those are and pluck them out?
That's the $64,000 question, and I don't have the security clearance to answer it because I don't know. But I know that
we're going to talk about that in the next segment a little bit. All right. And in the meantime, we're just going to take a little break and find out. Are you kidding me? We don't need tolls in Rhode Island. As you all know by now, the governor is proposing to borrow $500 million and toll our roads in order to pay it back. There's a lot of waste through interest costs and gantry costs that we can avoid. The Republican Policy Group over the last summer went through the budget and we found sources of money. They are specific, they are sustainable, and there is more money there than the governor is proposing to repair our bridges. I need you all to call your representatives and senators and tell them to adopt the Republican plan. More money, less cost, more bridge repair.
There will be a rally at the Rhode Island State House Rotunda on Tuesday, January 5th at 3 p.m. in support of the No Tolls plan. Make every effort to be there and make your voice heard.
Welcome back to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Representative Mike Chippendale, and we're talking about the Syrian refugee issue. A lot of Trump followers are responding to that call. They understand that this is an enemy unlike we've ever had, I think, in the history of the world, and there is a fear among people for our safety. You had mentioned in our last segment, Mike, that our own security personnel, our CIA, our FBI, are saying that they can't guarantee, they can't adequately screen people.
Correct. Yeah, and first of all, that should be alarming, and it is. But I think that bore itself out with the San Bernardino shooters who actually did go through the screening process, particularly the wife, where when she applied for her K-1 visa, she went through a screening process that included even the biometric system, which those who are in favor of the refugee influx are saying is the be-all end-all to all screening processes. She actually underwent that process twice and lied on her applications for her K-1 visa, and then also when she came over as a married individual to an American, she lied again, and she was not caught. So perhaps she had nothing in her history that would indicate radicalism, but she lied about her country of origin. And if we can't even catch something like that, what makes us think?
And from Saudi Arabia, which is not at war.
Correct.
And has the documentation and
They have all the means to check people,
Sure,
and they did a full
where the
screening.
FBI or the CIA
Absolutely.
could say, tell us about these people, give us all the
And
documentation
it was
you
actually
have on
our
them.
consulate who did the screening. You know, our consulate in both countries, both Pakistan and as well as Saudi Arabia, they did the screening. And if we cannot catch it, how are we supposed to expect 10,000 people coming at once? You know, let me put this in perspective. In the fiscal year of 2014, 2.5 million Afghanis tried to enter the U.S. as refugees. They entered the process. Out of those 2.5 million, the United States took 758. That's all that was accepted.
So less than 1,000.
Yes.
Okay.
We had 616,000 people.
Okay, that's a war-torn country, too.
Sure, and we had 616,000 people from South Sudan. Again, radical Islam is running wild. There's a lot of issues there in Sudan. We took 52 of those 600,000. There were over 400,000 from the Central African Republic. Again, the same thing, war-torn. We took 25. So history, our own history of accepting refugees after they go through the process has numbers like this. Why are we opening the floodgates to 10,000 refugees coming from an area of the world that is, well, in a sense, ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Syria is where the refugees are coming from. So ISIS has grown and was born in Syria. So we're really taking from the heart of where the evil is. Let's just put that extra level of protection in there, whatever that may be. If that means we have to wait to find out and figure out what it is, that's okay, because right now those refugees are in countries such as Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon. They're in Muslim countries where they have relative safety.
That's right.
You know, they want to come to the U.S. and have the full deal. That's great. That's what America's about. However, they're safe right now. They're not in
Syria.
So they're not in immediate jeopardy. Let's take the time. Let's do it properly. And again, I don't have the answer on what that is because I'm not a security specialist. But there must be a way that we can properly vet these people out. And if there's any question...
And we have to find that way. And I understand it's a war-torn country. They don't have easy access to documentation. You can't go and interview their neighbors because their neighbors aren't there anymore and those kinds of things. So it's going to take some time for our security personnel to figure this out.
Absolutely.
But it's important to keep Americans safe.
It's imperative.
I mean, the damage that San Bernardino did to, what it was, about 52 people, their lives, their families, their relatives, the psyche of our communities.
And our whole country was shaken by that. You know, this was something that you see in Israel, you know, those types of things happening over the years in Israel where someone will do something horrible in public. This happened in the streets of the United States of America. It wasn't Paris, which is still a long way away from us, but it's still the West. This was the United States. And I think it really sent a shockwave through Americans' hearts, which it should have, and it should have sent a strong message.
Yeah, it affects our open society.
Yes, it does.
When we don't feel safe, right?
Absolutely.
And to give the CIA and the FBI, just say, pause, no more, right? I was listening to the television today, and you had brought up Afghanistan. There are folks from Afghanistan and Iraq who we know have helped American soldiers, who have absolutely put themselves in danger to help our American boys, our American soldiers, and they're not being allowed to immigrate.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't understand what's going on here.
Neither do I.
At all.
And it's sort of reminiscent of the Hmong community during the Vietnam War, who helped us out so much, and then we sort of abandoned them. You know, it's unfortunate, and as a country, we should really.
But at least if we're going to bring some over, bring the ones we know are our friends.
Absolutely.
And put a pause on those that we don't have any idea. And you're right. You know, I was in Jordan earlier this year, and huge refugee settlements there, and they're safe. They're safe. America, Europe, we are supplying food and clothing and shelter to keep those folks safe while we figure out what to do with ISIS. Hopefully we can defeat them.
Absolutely. And they may not be living in the lap of luxury in these areas where they are, but
But they're safe.
They are safe, and that really is the most important thing until we figure this out.
Yeah, I know they showed pictures of bombed out villages. I get it. You can't live in a bombed out village that's just been reduced to rubble. But most of those folks really have gone to the surrounding countries. And, when we talk about these populations, we're talking about millions of people emptying out of Syria. They would rather stay in their country, right?
Absolutely.
I think about people leaving Rhode Island to go to another American state.
That's right.
And they don't want to go because their family is here, their associations, all their friends.
Everything we know is here. And the same with these refugees. Their customs, their neighbors, their whole lives were built there. So why would they want to leave? They want to go back. They're just trying to escape ultimate evil. And no one will blame them for that.
Unfortunately, we have that really bad group of people.
That's right.
The ISIS.
Yep.
The radicalized folks who are saying we look just like they do.
Yeah.
And they are insinuating themselves in those refugees.
Yeah, they're assimilating with all these different areas, these different groups, and they're getting where they need to. It's been borne out, and it's been proven, and that's the challenge we face.
Yeah, and so your point wasn't that not to take refugees.
No, not at all.
It's let's pause
and
make sure that we do it right.
Of course. Absolutely. This is America.
This is America. All right. We're going to take another break, and we'll be right back. Well, it was a little odd. We don't need tolls in Rhode Island. As you all know by now, the governor is proposing to borrow $500 million and toll our roads in order to pay it back. There's a lot of waste through interest costs and gantry costs that we can avoid. The Republican Policy Group over the last summer went through the budget, and we found sources of money. They are specific, they are sustainable, and there is more money there than the governor is proposing to repair our bridges. I need you all to call your representatives and senators and tell them to adopt the Republican plan. More money, less cost, more bridge repair.
There will be a rally at the Rhode Island State House Rotunda on Tuesday, January 5th at 3 p.m. in support of the No Tolls plan. Make every effort to be there and make your voice heard.
Welcome back to Common Sense. Today we have with us Representative Mike Chippendale, and we've been talking about the Syrian refugee issue and the danger that they pose to Americans. That's physical danger.
Sure.
But the president has also now taken this as an opportunity to attack our civil liberties.
Yeah, unfortunately. And it's not just the president. It's all folks who have a political predisposition against the Second Amendment. It's really shameless. The bodies of the fallen in California had not even cooled off, and the president had a press conference about gun control. I mean, the shamelessness that is exhibited by those folks holding this opinion, such.
They use every opportunity.
It's shameless. It really is. And I can't think of another word that fits it better. And so, yeah, we've now seen this tremendous push towards gun control, as if that was what precipitated what happened in California and what may precipitate what will happen in the future. It's just, there is absolutely no crossover whatsoever there. And our civil liberties should not be in question because of the acts of radicals who we failed to screen out of a system.
I couldn't have said it better. But let's go to, I'll take their side. They used guns.
They did. Absolutely. And
So if we take guns away from everybody, won't that stop violence?
Well, if we had a magic wand and we could make all guns disappear, with the wave of a magic wand, yes, it would. That would stop.
Do you think they'd use knives then?
Well, then they would migrate to another source of inflicting harm, of course. But we know realistically that when you impose laws that would restrict firearm ownership in any way, it's only going to affect those folks who value and respect the law. And certainly people who have set into their minds that I am going to go into a building and kill as many people as I possibly can understand that they're breaking a law. It's called murder. That's pretty much the biggest law you could break. And do you think they care how many rounds are in their magazine, or if their magazine is detachable from their assault weapon, or whatever cosmetic effect or attribute of this firearm? Do you think they care if that is a violation of the law? Of course they don't. They're there to kill people.
Sure, they will get around the law because
Absolutely.
they have a mission, which is to kill.
I mean, we just saw a Secret Service agent was robbed of his firearm. I mean, firearms can be robbed and stolen from anywhere. These bad guys will acquire their firearms any way they can. And as we saw in San Bernardino, those were illegally possessed, illegally obtained firearms. They will get their hands on any sort of firearm, legal or illegal, and
then they can alter them to have as many bullets and things.
Of course. It's when you're talking about implementing laws, you're only affecting those folks who value the laws, and those aren't the folks who own firearms that you need to be afraid of. The firearm community is. Would be
incredibly responsible.
Absolutely,
safety
one of
first.
The absolutely highest respect for the law. They go out of their way to know and understand the laws. It's the people who don't that we really have the problem with. So we should be more addressing the problem rather than an inanimate object that millions of law-abiding citizens have a God-given, constitutionally protected right to exercise every single day of their lives, which is that to protect themselves and their families and their nation. We're going after that, and that's what is really it's misguided, it's opportunistic, and it's just plain wrong. It's not going to solve problems. You're going to disarm good people, and that's not going to be good for the safety of this nation in any way, shape, or form. And I'll give you a great...
And I think of folks actually possessing firearms, law-abiding folks, they often have it for their own safety, to protect their families in their homes.
And that's been an American tradition
They're
forever.
not going to be going out in trying to shoot other people.
Absolutely not.
They're only keeping it inside their home to keep them and their families safe.
That's correct. That is absolutely. And we saw that there was a big article where 176 firearms had been confiscated in illegal firearms in Providence in I believe it was 2014. Okay. And so a group of folks did an extremely detailed study. They acquired every single arrest report from Providence for the last fiscal year, which happened to be 2013, because 2014 still has some open court cases. So they took the last year that was complete, 2013. They took every single firearm seizure arrest report, went through them to the final disposition. And do you know that 75% or more of the firearms charges were either dropped by the AG or dismissed in court? So only 25% of those people who violated the existing gun laws were actually prosecuted. So now they're going to come back to us in the Assembly and ask us for more laws? Well, my position would be, how about you do a better job enforcing the laws that you already have before you ask us for more? We're ranked as the 4th or 5th, depending on which scale you look at.
We're very low.
Strictest gun control state in the United States of America. We are also, depending on the source, but we do rank in reports as the #1 lowest homicides via firearm in the country. So we really have to prioritize what we're trying to do. And right now, the irrational, emotional response that we're seeing from those, again, who are politically predisposed to be against firearms, are not solutions. Those are just panicked reactions, and are not going to help this problem.
You hear guns don't kill. It's the person behind the gun.
Sure, of course.
Correct?
Of course.
And when they talk about gun violence, somehow that inanimate object, if I put a gun on the table, it's not going to pick itself up and shoot anybody.
Right.
It's the person behind the gun.
Absolutely.
So rather than gun violence, do you think we should be talking about gang violence or mental health issues?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was legislation that you had introduced that really started the whole entire mental health issue, where now we've just enacted a law that went into effect the 1st of 2015 that does report mental health data to the National Instant Criminal Check System, which is the check system that's used on every single firearm purchase in the country. And so so we're reporting, and this year, I think the number was 263 records, I believe, were reported, mental health records. That's a huge step in the right direction.
That was right after the shooting in Connecticut.
Yes.
I read a report that said Rhode Island was not reporting any
one of four states that did not
records.
report mental health records. So a task force was formed.
Sure.
We looked at the issue. It was a very challenging issue, but we overcame it because we worked together. Democrats, Republicans, Senate, House, public members, law enforcement, gun community. We all got together on a task force and wrote an outstanding piece of legislation that everyone agreed with. And now, as of January 1st, 2015, we report every adjudication of someone who has been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility. We report that to NICS. So now those people will never be able to legally purchase a firearm. That's the right thing to do.
That is the right thing to do, right. You try to identify them before they become violent and hurt somebody.
The gang issue is another issue. We need to help our inner cities to fight against the gang issue. But again...
And that's the violence. Don't call it gun violence. Call it gang violence.
You are so correct with that, Patricia. It is not gun violence. Guns can't be violent by virtue of the fact that they're inanimate. Gangs are violent.
Sure, and let's help our police forces...
They need the tools. How would you feel as an officer who arrests all these people and sends them to court and they get let go? We can't keep doing that.
We can't keep doing that. But that's the violence we have to fight.
Yes, it is.
Not trying to take guns away from law-abiding folks.
I couldn't say it better myself.
Okay. And we're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
When kindergarten kids play musical chairs, there's usually a fight over that last seat. If Rhode Island loses a seat in the U.S. House, do you think we'll see politicians doing the same thing? Are you kidding me? Every 10 years, the U.S. Census is used to determine the population of each of the states and, therefore, how many seats in the House of Representatives each one gets. For the last 2 years, Rhode Island has retained virtually the same population once births, deaths, and migration are taken into account. The problem is that other states of the Union are gaining population, some of them rather robustly. Massachusetts, our neighbor to the north, is gaining population briskly as folks move there for work. Here folks move in for welfare and they move out to find work. If nothing changes between now and 2020 census, the ocean state could easily drop to a single congressional district. Then you'd see the political fur fly. But by then, it would be too late to do anything about it, except eat your own young trying to get that last seat. Remember what I just said about people moving to Mass for the jobs? Well, now is the time to create a jobs environment right here in Little Rhodey. If we do, by the time the next census arrives, we could easily be keeping up with the Joneses. The steps to creating that environment of jobs are straightforward and pretty well understood. Reduce government spending as a means to reduce the tax load on the Rhode Island economy. Reduce state mandates and regulations to achieve a similar result. And speed up the process of delivering government services to businesses, such as permits and approvals. Easy, right? So, is that what we as a state are going to do? Or instead, will we just conduct business as usual until that game of ultimate musical chairs breaks out in advance of the 2022 election? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense. We have today with us Representative Michael Chippendale, and we've been talking about the Syrian refugees and then about the furor that has kind of been ignited one more time about gun control. To me, there are so many law-abiding citizens out there who might want to collect guns, who might want to go hunting, who might want to do some trap shooting or target shooting. They shouldn't be restricted from that.
Sure.
Because they're not purchasing the guns to go out and shoot somebody.
No,
what you want to keep them away is from the people who are criminals.
Sure.
And the people who mean to do harm, or the mentally ill. And we have kind of addressed the mentally ill.
We have, yes.
You're right. The Republicans brought that.
Rolling.
We started the ball rolling on that. We brought that to the attention of the Attorney General, and luckily there was a commission that has gotten Rhode Island starting to report that data to the federal database. I know that this session, there's probably going to be gun control bills that come before us in the General Assembly. And you mentioned in our last segment that Rhode Island already has one of the most strict gun processes.
Absolutely.
Or gun ownership processes. So I guess I'd like to put our viewers' minds at ease that we're just flipping guns out there to anybody who says, "Oh, that's cute, can I have one?"
Right.
So kind of tell our viewers what our process to obtain a gun is. It is rigorous here in Rhode Island.
It's very rigorous, absolutely. If you, first of all, there are age requirements, so in order to own what's called a long arm, which might be a shotgun you'd go hunting with, or a rifle you'd go target shooting with, you need to be 18 years old. For a handgun of any nature, you need to be 21 years old. For a handgun, you need to take a safety course and pass it, and you're issued an identification card which allows you to purchase a handgun. You cannot transport that handgun outside of your home or your place of work anywhere except to and from a bona fide shooting range or to your place of employment or a gunsmith. And it has to be carried in a very specific, legally prescribed manner where there's no way that the ammo would be near the firearm. It has to be in a case. All of the precautions are taken, separate compartments in the car, etc. For folks who, whether it's for work purposes or personal purposes, choose to carry a firearm, a handgun on themselves for personal protection or whatever reason, there is an extremely rigorous application process that goes through.
That's the concealed carry
weapons permit.
Let's just talk about somebody wanting to go and buy a gun to keep it in their house.
Okay.
You've said, can they just go into a shop and pick one out and take it home?
No. So you'll go into a gun shop, and at one point, the federal government required that you would pick out your firearm. You would fill out a form that goes to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They check it. Another copy goes to your police chief, or the police chief. They check it. Another copy stays with the gun store. Then you would wait 5 days. They call that a cooling off period. Well, they eliminated the 5-day waiting period, the federal government did, and they implemented what's called an instant check, which is the NICS system, which is where we added the mental health check. However, Rhode Island, we actually still require on a state level, we require a 7-day waiting period. That has not gone away. So even though the federal government's 5-day waiting period has gone away, in Rhode Island, you still need to wait 7 days. So whether I'm purchasing...
you pick out your gun, you have to make out a form.
An extensive form that
do you have to take a test before you buy that?
No, if it were a handgun, you would have already had to have taken that.
So you have to take the test first.
Sure. Yes.
Get a card that says now you're allowed to buy it.
Correct.
All right. So there's the first part of it.
Yes.
First, you have to figure out, okay, I want a gun. Then you have to get the materials, study them.
Yep.
Take a test at an approved facility.
Yes, and the exceptions to that would be either you have taken a hunter safety course, which is a rigorous 10-hour course, or you're a member or retired member of the armed forces. And certainly our armed forces offer the greatest qualifications
for firearms
that you could possibly hope for. So you go through that process, you fill it out, it goes through.
So just when you're thinking about it, first you have to take a test. You have to study materials about what a gun is, the parts of the gun, all the safety.
And that's not to carry, that's just to purchase a handgun. You absolutely have to take that test before you even buy one. And whether you buy one, whether it's your first firearm or your 101st firearm that you're purchasing, every one requires a 7-day wait. So it's not like you have to wait 7 days once and then you can just stockpile. You have to wait 7 days every time.
Every time?
Yes. And then,
all right, so you take the test, you get your blue card, you pick out a gun, and you still have to wait 7 days.
Absolutely, yes.
And during that 7 days, what happens?
Well, during that 7 days, that form is sent to the police chief, where they will, of course, run a BCI, background criminal investigation, on you. The police chief may even have some local information about you that they can certainly put into the process. The gun store sends a copy of that to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They retain a copy for that, and the gun store also does a NICS check, which is where they plug in your information to a nationally maintained database.
So somebody couldn't commit a crime in Kentucky
no.
and then come to Rhode Island and buy a gun here?
Absolutely not. If you violated a crime that prohibits you or disqualifies you from owning a firearm legally, it doesn't matter what state you go to, that will show up. So over the years, it's become much safer, exponentially safer with the NICS check because of that multi-state reporting, whereas the BCI check may not have covered that all because not every state shared BCI information. But in Rhode Island, we do both. We do the BCI as well as the NICS. So you're really getting that double check. You do have the ultimate say of the police chief who will either sign off or not sign off on that. It's not as nilly-willy as people on the other side of the argument would like to say. Another thing that was brought up earlier was this alleged gun show loophole.
Yeah.
I'd like to just set
somebody
it straight
can go
that,
to a gun show and pick up a gun and just take it
first
home?
of all, Rhode Island does not have gun shows. We don't allow them in Rhode Island. You can't sell or purchase firearms at a gun show. This alleged loophole that people like to refer to is a complete fallacy. What they're talking about is two individuals, let's say you and I are in Georgia where they have gun shows, and I say, hey, would you like to purchase my firearm? And you say, yes, I would. Here's $100, here's my firearm. That's the loophole. But that loophole is a violation of the law. It's incumbent upon the person who's selling to ensure that that person buying is competent and is not disqualified from owning a firearm. So,
and in Rhode Island, I couldn't sell you a gun.
Absolutely not.
I'd have to arrange for you to pick it up
with a federal firearm licensed dealer.
With a dealer.
Who then run all of those checks I described earlier.
So person to person, you can't sell to me, I can't sell to you. You have to go to a dealer and it has to go through him.
Absolutely. So the only real hand-to-hand sales are being done illegally on the street. Someone, whether they stole a firearm or however they obtained it, and they sell it to someone else. 100% illegal. Those people need to be prosecuted. There need to be minimum sentences, and they need to be punished heavily for doing that. And maybe then we'll get through those people.
Sure, enforce the laws that are already on the books.
Let's do that. Let's try that.
And I know a lot of folks in the recent years have really started buying firearms. I guess guns are just, everybody is afraid. There is a fear here. And going back to our earlier two segments, one of the fears is that terrorists or radicalized folks are going to come into our neighborhoods, going to come into our movie theaters or our malls. And people want that safety. They want to know that they and their families and the ones that they care and love about are safe.
Absolutely.
So the call to pause on Syrian refugees until we get a good system in place is appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely appropriate. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's the proper and responsible thing to do.
Yep, it's about keeping us safe. So I really want to thank you all for listening this week, and thank you, Mike, for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
He's the expert par excellence, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. Today we are starting a new segment called the U.S. Federal Budget for Us Regular Folks. We're going to try and break the budget down into parts that we can all understand. Sometimes we will use visual aids to help, sometimes we'll use numbers, and sometimes we'll just talk. People learn and understand concepts in different ways, and we will present this information in as many ways as possible. As the source of the facts, we are going to be using the budget of the U.S. government as posted by the U.S. Government Printing Office and signed by President Barack Obama. We're going to be using the 2013 figures rather than the 2015 budget because at this time those figures are finished and in the books. Anything later than that is not final yet. Today we want to cover three major segments of our budget. The amount of money that comes into the government through taxes, fees, and other forms of income, the revenue. Next, we want to show you how far that revenue gets us towards paying the obligations of the federal government. And lastly, we want to cover the portion of the budget that we have to borrow money for. First up is revenue. Our federal government collects money through taxes, fees, tolls, customs duties, and a number of other smaller sources of income. Not too surprising, the largest portion of that is income tax. In 2013, the federal government collected $1,333 $316,405,000,000 in income tax. The next tax that is collected is a corporate tax. Here the federal government collects $242 billion. Next are excise taxes. That amounts to $200 billion. Miscellaneous taxes, fees, and tolls add up to right around $100 billion. That's a total of $1.6 trillion. It's a lot of money. So instead of having to deal with that figure, we are going to turn it into this bucket containing 1.6 pounds of dry red kidney beans. To understand any budget, you have to have some skills at bean counting. So, the total annual income for the U.S. government for operating expenses was right around $1.6 trillion in 2013. Here's where things get a little complicated. In 2013, the feds also collected $947 billion in Social Security payments. That's the combination of the FICA bite taken out of your paycheck each week and a matching amount paid into Social Security funds by your employer. Benefits paid out that year were only $827 billion. Guess what happened to the rest? Uncle Sam borrowed it. Some $113 billion to cover regular budget expenses. We will be using white beans to show borrowed money. So, if you're scoring at home, you'll notice a little discrepancy when we get around to balancing this all. Now, how do we spend it? First, we have hard obligations. Money we have to spend or people may die. Unemployment, health, Medicare, welfare, Social Security, veterans benefits, and the interest on our present debt. We are going to save getting into what each of these actually add up to for another show. But suffice it to say that these essential services added up to $2,417,949,000,000 in 2013. That's 2.4 pounds of beans. Oh, look, that's all we have here. That leaves us a whopping surplus of no beans at all to pay for everything else. By the way, that includes national defense, the Departments of Energy, Commerce, Transportation, Justice, the EPA, IRS, HUD, and everything else the government does. In 2013, those services of our federal government cost $1,092,395,000,000, or about a pound and a tenth of beans. So it's time to look again at that special revenue source. We already talked a little bit about the Social Security Trust Fund. In 1966, this fund was moved into the General Revenue Fund. By the way, that's $947 billion in 2013. But we're borrowing some of these beans to cover non-Social Security expenses. That's why we have the white ones for money we have to pay back, so you can easily see the relationship. It's here that we want to introduce you to, well, you. You are a U.S. citizen, and being a U.S. citizen, your government finds it useful to take loans out in your name called Treasury bonds. To the rest of the world, U.S. Treasury bonds are some of the least risky investments in the world because they are backed by you. You have proven to be a very responsible borrower and have the highest credit rating in the world. Now, to make you feel better about taking your Social Security money, the government takes a loan out in your name and puts an IOU in place of the money that they took from you. So here we are with the total collected by our government to run itself in 2013 was $2.77 trillion, or 2 3/4 pounds of beans, now divided between the income beans and the debt beans. And we're still a little over $1 trillion short. So where's that money going to come from? Remember those Treasury bonds? The ones written in your name that were sold to foreign powers, many of which are not our friends? That's where the money comes from. There you have it, folks. A quick review may be in order. Our government collects taxes, fees, and your Social Security money that amounts to $2.4 trillion. It then takes the remainder of your Social Security taxes by borrowing it from you and having you be the person responsible to pay it back. It then borrows from anyone who will pay them back who will write them a check for the remainder. And in the end, that's what you owe Social Security and the rest of the debt incurred. You went further into debt by $1.2 trillion in 2013, actually more than 1/3 of the money spent by our government. As I said earlier, this analysis is based on the budget of the United States of America, signed by President Barack Obama and posted on www.gpo.gov/budget. That's a lot of beans, folks, especially if our debt is called and we have to settle up quickly. Look at all those white ones. Now do you know or see why fiscal conservatives keep claiming there's a problem?